Thank you for joining me today for what I consider a very important announcement. As everyone knows, over the last 2-3 weeks, we've suffered in Arkansas from historic flooding. I'll never forget the image that I had as I was in a helicopter traveling from Little Rock to Fort Smith along the Arkansas River and seeing the massive flooding, but also seeing the importance of the levee system in our state and how in so many instances it was the wall literally that was preventing the flooding of farmland, homes, and other property and businesses. And so the levee system in Arkansas, through my experience, is absolutely critical to control flooding, to prevent flooding, and to make sure that property is protected to the great extent possible in our state. We rely upon the levee system, but as we have known from the past, they have not all been maintained to the level that they should be maintained. And so in this last flooding, we've seen instances in which a levee that has not been properly maintained to Corps of Engineers standards has breached. And whenever it breached and it's not in Corps of Engineers standards, then the cost of repairing that falls upon the state of Arkansas or falls upon the citizens of the community. And so we have a lot of work ahead. One, to learn from what we've experienced in the last few weeks and our levee system, how we can improve the system for the future, and to make sure that we're better prepared for the floods that we know will come periodically in the state of Arkansas. I'm delighted to be joined by these members of the General Assembly that are with me that have been impacted by flooding in their communities, but also have been instrumental in addressing improvements in our levee system, and they understand the needs for this in the future. I particularly want to recognize Senator Rapert because in 2017, where's Senator Rapert? I got the wrong side. Senator Rapert had experience with flooding, but sponsored legislation that was passed that was very helpful. And we also did some levee repair work that was beneficial in the last flooding. But one of the items that were required by the legislation that Senator Rapert sponsored and I signed was that the county clerks tried to determine the levees in their area and to have the levee boards and the clerks report to our Department of Natural Resources, our ANRC, about the levees that exist in their area, the state of repair, and the organizational structure. It's estimated that we have 93 levees in Arkansas, and fewer than 20 of those levees responded to the legislation and made the reports as required. And that's not a good response. Now, why did that happen? Of the 93 levees, some do not have organizational boards. They do not have leadership. They're not in operation anymore, and so there's no one to do the reporting. There's no one to organize that. And so that is one of the challenges that we face. We have levees that are needed, but there's not an organizational structure that will provide the maintenance, the inspections that are needed to keep them up to standard, and to levy any assessments that are needed to provide the funding for the maintenance of those levees. And so with that background, where do we go from here? Today, I'm pleased to announce that I'm signing Executive Order 1910 that will establish the Arkansas Levee Task Force. This is designed to do a number of things. The task force will have the duties to study and analyze the current condition of the state's levee system, to study and analyze and present future sources and requirements for adequate funding, repair and maintenance of the levee system, to analyze the monitoring reporting systems, and to review the adequacy of current laws and organizational structure, and to make recommendations and a report by December 31 of 2019. It's a short time frame because we need this information. And so this, by executive order, this task force will be established. Members of this task force will include representative of the Arkansas Commissioner of State Lands, Secretary of the Department of Public Safety, Secretary of the Department of Agriculture or their designee, Secretary of the Department of Finance and Administration, Natural Resources Commission, Department of Emergency Management, obviously an important element for this study, Geographic Information Systems. The Waterways Commission will be a participant in it, but I also wanted to make sure that we have county judge participation, county clerk, municipal officials, and additional citizens as designated by myself. I will add that I will be asking the Senate Pro Tem and the Speaker of the House to designate 2 senators and 2 representatives to serve on this task force as well. I would envision a number of about 20 on this Arkansas Levee Task Force. I consider this extraordinarily important work that will make a difference in the lives of our citizens and their health and safety for the future. I also want to announce today that I'll be seeking legislative approval for $10 million that will immediately go to the Department of Emergency Management, that will be allocated as needed based upon needs to repair and maintain the levee system in Arkansas. Adam will handle this money in coordination with the ANRC and make sure that this is properly coordinated by asking legislative support for this $10 million that will be a start for repairing our levee system so that we can be prepared for the next flooding incident in Arkansas that we all know is sure to come. With that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
The $10 million, where is that going to be coming from? And do you already have identified where the repairs need to be made? And also, you talked about this being the start. Do you envision asking for more money for flood repairs?
That money is available from our reserve allocation fund that we have. It can be transferred to Adam for typical disaster relief, and so that money is available. I do seek legislative approval because I want to make sure that they are part and are supportive of this effort for our levee system, but I would ask for an appropriation to make sure that we can develop the rules that are needed to spend this money and how it will be allocated based upon the needs across the state. In terms of whether additional funds will be needed down the road, that obviously will depend upon some of the recommendations from the Levee Task Force, but clearly $10 million will be utilized very quickly in the repair of a couple of levees that have become somewhat famous because of their television and media coverage as we watch dramatically the levees either break or about to break. And of course, one of them is in Yell County, and the other levee is in Faulkner, Perry County area.
Governor, we knew about this issue 2 years ago. Is this one situation where maybe we kind of should have done this sooner?
Well, you can always look back and say what we should have done sooner, but that was a pretty bold step that we took 2 years ago. That bold step was to actually, we did put some rainy day funds in, and Senator Rayford might want to speak to that. Why don't you speak to what we did and what you think how difference that made?
Thank you very much, Governor, and I do want to say thank you on behalf of the entire state, and especially the legislature, for you responding in this way. You never know what you're going to face on any given day, and nobody was planning for the worst Arkansas River flooding in history. I want to speak to that legislation. I remember the day that I met with the governor and his team about the levee situation back in 15 and 16. And to your point, and I want to say thank you to you because you've covered this story well, to your point, the situation that we had that brought me to the governor 2 years ago was in 1990 we had the historic flood and the crest on the Arkansas River, especially at the Toadsuck Lock and Dam. That area never got repaired. The reason it never got repaired is because there was no active levee board. that was monitoring that situation. So that flood came and went, and you still had this gaping hole. I literally called Governor Asa Hutchinson in the evening during that flooding event in 2015, if you recall. And I could hear the water running over the levee like Niagara Falls. That's when I realized, and I began to make calls. I called the county judges. I called around, and they said, "Oh, Senator, yeah, that's where it went over in 1990." And it was literally nobody would make a decision on this. I went to the Corps of Engineers. They said, "It's not our problem, sir. That's a levee board, and we stop where the levee begins." I went to the levee board. They were collecting some small amount of assessments over the years for a flooding district, which Representative Hillman knows that, but there was nobody administering that. And so I began to realize there absolutely nobody claimed that they had responsibility, not the county, not the state, not the Corps, not anyone, yet we're sitting here watching all of this infrastructure and private property be threatened, and it's nobody's responsibility. So I did what everybody does these days, and I went to social media and began to ask for help. But I went to my governor too. And the governor said he would do whatever he could to help. We then had in 16, that was followed by another high crest, which by the way was the second highest crest after 90 was in 16. And what's critical about all of this in our areas is that we lost access to roads. This is not just an agriculture field problem. This is not just a flooding of home problem. This is a situation where people can't get to hospitals, they can't get to doctor's visits, they can't get to their jobs, and if there is a true emergency, it might take an hour to get to them, or maybe even 2 hours in some cases, depending on the situation. So after those two events, the governor looked at that. He began to talk with us, and we responded. And that was the legislation you referred to. What that legislation allowed, and I want to thank the Arkansas Counties Association, I don't know if any of them are here today, but they came together with me and realized we need to get authority to reappoint those defunct levee boards. Therein lies that one piece of the legislation. And here's what happens, and this is where we can build to make a difference in Arkansas. We authorize county judges to reappoint members to defunct levee boards. When the governor cited that we only had 20 reporting, if the balance of those are not functioning and they're not operational, there is legislation in place right now that county judges can take action to reappoint members to defunct levee boards. They've got to do that because that's where now you have a responsible party. That responsible party in our county, former County Judge Baylor House appointed 3 people to the Perry County Levee District number 1. They immediately began their work. They worked with Arkansas Natural Resources Commission, and I want to thank them. And they worked and they sought money for a grant. They got a grant. They fixed the levee breach from 1990. They replaced floodgates that had been there since the 1940s that were not doing their job. And that county has been enjoying the protection of that up until the worst flood in history, because it's overtopped it. And here's the key for that area, and this is why we've got to get on this now and do what the governor wants to do. Because County Judge Baylor House, supported by County Judge Toby Davis, who's there now, got that levee board functional. They did the work. They were certified as minimally acceptable by the Corps of Engineers. That means that now that that levee is decimated, they qualify for 80% federal funding to repair that levee. Had they not taken action and Governor Hutchinson not signed that legislation just 2 years ago, that levee district now would have no money from the federal government to be able to assist them and would be left worse off than they were before. As a part of this, and I'll finish my comments, you can tell I'm passionate about this. 2 weeks, I had people that flooded out of their homes, but 2 weeks, a half a mile of road, Governor, is all that kept them from being able to get back and forth to their doctor's visits, to take dialysis, et cetera. 2 weeks, we need that half a mile of road raised up. And again, thank you for what you're doing. This is very important to me personally and to our community, and we thank you for your leadership on this.
Thank you, Senator, and let me follow up a little more, one more part of the answer. And this is not simply a state responsibility. There's a balance here. The Corps of Engineers build the levee system. They turn it over to local control and local levee boards. And those levee boards have been responsible historically for maintenance, for levying, assessments, and making sure the levees are in proper condition. That system has not worked well because of they thought the levee's fine, so they disbanded. They didn't want to tax themselves for whatever reason. And so over time, we get to the situation we're in now. I think we took the appropriate step in 2017, which was to give a reporting requirement to the state so we could have a better level of awareness, trying to reinvigorate the levee boards. Now, it's clearly time that we have to take stronger action, and that's what I'm asking the levee task force to review and make recommendations on.
So how soon can folks start seeing these repairs for levees?
Well, as soon as we can get the emergency rules and get legislative approval, then the money will be able to start flowing so that we can do the repair work.
So it should be just immediately after all that is passed through?
It should not be any delay at all. I mean, obviously, we have to be satisfied that they have a good plan, that they're using good cost estimates and good engineering, because these are not small levee projects when you're looking at repairing a breach. These are very large engineering projects, and we got to build it to Corps of Engineer standards. So that takes some time to get the engineering work done, but the money will be available as soon as we have legislative approval and our emergency rules are adopted.
Governor, is any more groups or people who realize after this flood that they were in danger, have they come to you? Has there been a groundswell of people trying to say, whoops, we need to fix this? And what are you hearing?
Yes, the answer is yes, and I'm delighted to have the St. Francis Levee District here. Would you introduce yourself again?
Yes, sir. I'm Rob Rash, CEO of the St. Francis Levee District of Arkansas. Thank you for the invitation.
So Rob is an example of the St. Francis Levee District of a district that works well. It is well managed. It is a model across the nation, and so I'll be asking them to participate in this task force as well. But yes, I've had people that have been concerned about the levees that have come to me, primarily county judges who have had to deal with the flooding and have to deal with levee boards that are not operational, and then individual homeowners. So there's a greater awareness that the levee system is important and we're going to have to invest in it. There is that support, and that's one of the reasons that action is being taken.
Beyond the levees, looking at the cost of the flooding, do you have a sense yet of how much of a cost there's going to be to the state for different repairs and things beyond levees, and an idea of where the money's going to come from for the deal?
The largest cost items will be public infrastructure, and I mean the damage to homes is very large and is heartbreaking, and to businesses. The large numbers will come in with the public infrastructure and the damage to the roads, damage that we might not even be aware of yet, to the lock and dam system, which will be a federal responsibility. But that's still being measured because the water continues to recede. So those measurements have not come in, but without any doubt, you're looking at well over $100 million in repair costs that will be necessary in terms of public infrastructure and private losses.
In terms of how the state would be able to pay for it,
Well, first of all, we will have federal assistance. I'm delighted that we have the Federal Disaster Declaration, and that will cover much of the public infrastructure repair. It will have assistance also for the homeowners to a certain level, and businesses. So that's where the greatest dollar reimbursement will come, is from the federal government in their disaster relief. We do have disaster mitigation funds in Arkansas, and we will utilize that as needed to do repair and mitigate for the future. Yes.
Well, so as far as the funding goes, again, for the levies, I know you're making emergency funds available now, but as far as the studying and the analyzing of funding, I get a sense from some levy districts that they're like, our millage just isn't high enough. Is there any room to consider the state as a future funding source, or is that just not ideal?
Well, the state is, I'm asking the legislature and the state to put in $10 million. That's a pretty good investment. And, you know, there may be additional state money that is necessary to put in to help, and it might be matching dollars. And I would expect actually that might be part of the grant program that we look at longer term, is that if a levy board is reconstituted and they need to do an assessment, that we might be able to match them to get it up to core standards. And then, as the senator said, that allows the Corps of Engineers to cover replacement costs in the future or repair costs. And so we want to get it up to that standard level, and it's a partnership primarily with the responsibility following on the local levy board and the local jurisdictions, and then we'll look for ways that the state can support and complement their investment. Thank you all very much. We'll be available if there's any additional questions, and I want to thank so many here that have expressed interest that very likely will be tapped to provide assistance on this levy task force. I will add that this will be staffed by ANRC and ATOM, and so this will be a task force that will have state resources just in terms of staff support and making sure that they have